The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the apartment. No TV, no music, no voice on the other end of a conversation. Just that low, mechanical whine that reminded me how quiet life had gotten. I sat at the edge of the sagging couch, my elbows resting on my knees, staring at the same coffee table I'd picked up at a garage sale years ago. The wood was chipped, one leg slightly shorter than the others, so it wobbled if you leaned on it wrong. It fit the place, worn down but still holding together out of sheer stubbornness. A year ago, I was a homeowner with a wife, a yard, and a future I thought was steady as concrete. Now I was in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of mildew, my tools stacked neatly in the corner like soldiers waiting for orders, and my old Chevy truck parked downstairs, still carrying the dust from a dozen job sites. The divorce papers were final. She was Mrs. Victor Hayes now. Just saying his name in my head made my teeth clench. A man who'd once bought me beers after work, who'd talked about us being brothers in arms in the business world. He'd walk around job sites with me, asking about materials, crew scheduling, as if he gave a damn about the work. I should have known the whole time his real interest was parked in my driveway wearing my ring. When it all came out, the texts, the late nights she said were girls' trips, the weekend she claimed she was visiting her sister, Victor didn't even flinch. He put a hand on my shoulder like I was a dog that needed to be put down and told me, "I hope you can move on, man." Like he was doing me a favor by taking her off my hands. The worst part? She smiled in that same moment. Not a gloating smile, not exactly. More like a quiet relief, like she'd been waiting to breathe for years, and he was the one holding the oxygen tank. The lawyers went through everything like they were dividing scraps. The house, the savings, even the dog. I fought for the dog. I lost. She got the house, the dog, and the man who'd helped destroy the marriage. I walked away with my tools, my truck, and a small settlement that wouldn't last more than a few months if work didn't pick up. But I told myself it was enough. Enough to get me back on my feet. Enough to keep my pride intact. Except pride doesn't fill a fridge. I kept my schedule busy with small renovations, a deck here, a bathroom remodel there. But the truth was, I was barely treading water. Every time I opened my phone and scrolled past pictures of Victor and her on social media, him in his tailored suits, her in dresses I'd never seen her wear for me, I felt the sting. And still I looked, like pressing on a bruise to make sure it still hurt. Nights were the worst. There's a certain weight to a bed when you're the only one in it. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moments that should have told me something was wrong. The times she'd moved her phone just out of sight. The way her smile had become polite instead of warm. The "I'm just tired" that started to be her only answer to my touch. Sometimes, I wondered if she'd been thinking of him even when she was with me. The apartment was on the wrong side of town, but it was what I could afford. The walls were thin. I knew my neighbors' arguments better than my own memories, and the plumbing clanked every time someone showered upstairs. But it was mine for now. I'd learned to live smaller. My tools stayed in the corner, ready for the next job call. My truck stayed fueled up, and I stayed angry. Not the shouting kind of angry, but the kind that burns slow and deep, the kind you can carry like a secret. Victor Hayes had money, connections, and now my wife. But I told myself, one day, he'd see me again. Not as the man he beat in this little game, but as someone standing across from him, eye to eye, with something he couldn't buy. That thought kept me going. That, and the work. Always the work. Because in this world, when everything else falls apart, you hold on to what you can build with your own two hands. I didn't know it yet, but the phone call that would change everything, the one that would put me right in Victor Hayes' orbit again, was only days away. And it wouldn't come from him. It would come from someone I'd never met, standing barefoot in a sundress, holding a door open to a house I should never have stepped inside. The morning the call came, I was under my truck with an oil filter in my palm and grit in my teeth, trying not to think about Victor's grin. The phone vibrated on the concrete at my shoulder, skittering like it wanted to escape. Unknown number. I almost let it ring out. Jobs that start with unknown numbers usually end with bounced checks. Is this? A woman's voice, clear and bright. The contractor who did the cedar restoration on the Porter farmhouse. I slid out and squinted at the thin January sun. That's me. Who's asking? My name's Samantha. I've got an old place outside the city that needs a lot of work. Roof, windows, plaster, maybe electrical. I'm interviewing people this week. I saw photos of your work, and Well, the trim on that farmhouse looked like it could sing. I wiped my hands and tried to sound like a man who had more than 2 invoices left to pay. I would behave. Where's the property? She named a back road I knew by reputation. Ivy-choked stone fences, deer in the fields, money tucked into second homes. It's my family's estate, she added, then laughed like the word embarrassed her. Don't worry, it's not haunted. Just old. Tomorrow morning work for you? Today, she said. If you can. I'm here all afternoon. And I pay for your time even if it's just a walkthrough. Money talked. And right then, I was starved for conversation. Text me the address. I drove out with the heater protesting and the radio low, the way I always drive to a first look. Nothing gets promised at a first look. You measure, you listen, you pretend the place hasn't already decided what it will take from you. The estate revealed itself just after a blind curve, a long gravel throat leading to a house the color of rain clouds. Stone pillars leaned like tired shoulders, and the porch sagged politely, as if apologizing for its own weight. Vines map-traced the walls. Someone, once upon a time, had planted roses, and their woody skeletons bristled under frost. Before I could knock, the front door cracked open and a voice called. 1 second. A pair of bare feet appeared first, small and pale, then the rest of her, sundressed the color of lemon cream, a long sweater shrugged off one shoulder, dark hair up in a careless knot. Winter had no business tolerating a sundress, but she wore it like the house wore ivy, bold habit that ignored the season. I'm Samantha, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Sorry for the mess. She glanced back into the hallway and winced. It's a lot. I stepped inside and felt the old boards think about it. The place smelled like dust and cedar closets, with a vein of something sweet, vanilla, maybe, or her shampoo. Sunlight made long gold bars on the floor. A staircase rose at a slow, grand angle, banister glossy where 100 hands had slid along it. I've seen worse. I lied, because clients like to believe they're special but not hopeless. She smiled like she could tell I was lying and forgave me anyway. We walked the first floor. In the dining room, a chandelier sulked with a dozen dead bulbs. In the kitchen, plaster had bubbled near a window and cracked like an old map. She followed close, arms folded against the draft, asking careful questions that told me she'd done her homework. How long would kiln-dried oak acclimate before flooring? Could the original windows be saved if we used restoration glass? Did I have a guy who respected old wires? I am the guy, I said, and her mouth did a quick, impressed curve that I had the childish urge to earn again. In the library, the afternoon slanted in through dirty panes and lit the dust like snow. She ran a finger along a shelf and left a clean trail. My grandfather used to smoke cigars in here, she said. I was 8, and I told him the room smelled like pirate ships. He said that was the point. You grew up here? Sometimes. The way she said it suggested rooms full of adults who loved money more than each other. She hugged herself a little tighter. The bones are good, right? Yeah, I said, because they were, and because I liked the way her shoulders eased at the word. She just needs someone to listen to her. The house is a she? Samantha's eyes glinted. Good. I was worried I'd hired a man who said it. We climbed the stairs. She went ahead, heel to toe, careful on the soft tread. The sundress swayed and the sweater slipped further, exposing a warm triangle of skin at the back of her neck. I told myself not to notice. Told myself I was here because I needed a contract, not because the air in the hallway tasted like citrus and something that felt like trouble. On the landing, a tall window framed the lawn. That long gravel throat, the stone fence beyond, the world held at a distance. My father says I should just sell, she said, almost to the glass. But I think the place still remembers things. It makes a sound at night, you know, like it's breathing. Old houses do that, I said. They exhale when the heat kicks off. I didn't tell her that I believed her anyway, that some houses keep secrets like they keep heat. She turned and caught me looking, at the window, at the house, at her. You really love this work, she said softly. It's the only thing that ever tells the truth back. It came out before I could stop it. She let the words sit between us a second longer than casual. Down the hall, she opened a guest room where wallpaper peeled at the corners like an old sticker. I'm on a budget, she said, color rising in her cheeks as if that admission violated some family rule. But I'm not cheap. I want it done right. That's the only way I know, I said. I'll put together a scope tonight. Phasing is smart. Roof and windows first to stop water. Then we can work our way inward. She nodded and, for the first time, looked a little young. No makeup, bare feet, a dress that belonged to late June. Not this cold day. 24 maybe. Too young to be standing in a house like this with the responsibility of ghosts. Back in the foyer, she hesitated. Can I ask something weird? Probably, I said. Do you ever get, I don't know, attached to a place? Like it's more than lumber and nails? All the time. I slid my tape measure back into its holster. But I've learned the difference between attachment and possession. Her smile came slow. Maybe you can teach me. The checkbook appeared from the kitchen island, and for a second, it felt like we were crossing a line I couldn't see. She wrote the deposit with her tongue touching the corner of her mouth in concentration, a kid's habit that somehow survived into womanhood. When she handed me the check, our fingers brushed. Static cracked. Maybe it was the cold, maybe not. Sorry, she laughed, and it spilled out warm. I shocked you. Just a little, I said, pocketing both electricity and money. I'll email the scope and a schedule. We'll do this right. At the door, she touched the frame like a blessing. Thank you for not looking at this place the way agents do. They keep saying potential like it's polite for unsalvageable. Agents like clean lines and granite, I said. I like stories. Outside, the sky had lowered, a winter lid. I promised to start date in 2 weeks if my crew stayed healthy. She stood barefoot on the threshold like a dare to the weather. Bundle up, I said. You, too, she answered, and for a heartbeat I wondered if she meant more than the cold. Back in the truck, I unfolded the check to note the name and flinched, the way you do when the doctor taps a bruise. Samantha Hayes. The signature curled across the bottom with the casual certainty of someone who'd been signing things her whole life. Hayes. I stared at the house, at the woman in the lemon dress waving from the porch, at the gravel road that now felt like a fuse. It wasn't haunted, she had said. I hadn't believed her then. I believed her even less now. I told myself to focus on numbers, spans, pitches, the staccato language that keeps a man from hearing the old music in his own head. I laid my tape along the baseboard, scratched notes in my pad, and pretended the house wasn't breathing around me like a thing waking up. Samantha perched on the opposite counter, barefoot and bright, sipping from a chipped mug that said good morning, sunshine in letters so cheerful they felt like a practical joke in January. Do you think the wall's load-bearing? She asked, pointing to the divider between the kitchen and the butler's pantry. Looks like it wants to be, I said, but I'll check the joists before we bully it. She smiled, and I caught the edge of a dimple that hadn't shown itself yesterday. The sundress looked even more unreasonable today, like she had refused the weather on principle. A thin anklet flashed when she crossed one foot over the other. I bent to read the tape and told myself I was measuring wood, not wondering about people. The kitchen ran long and narrow, a galley meant for staff who no longer existed. The ceilings were high enough to swallow voices. One wall carried open shelves with mismatched plates and a single-framed photo leaning backward, half hidden behind a stack of bowls. When I moved closer, chasing a measurement near the window casing, that frame caught the light and flickered in my peripheral vision. Mind if I set this aside? I asked, meaning the plates. Do whatever you need, she said. It's all chaos anyway. I shifted the crockery, cleared a bit of counter, and picked up the frame because it was in the way. Because it was there. Because the house intended me to. The photo was glossy, professional, one of those formal family portraits meant to look candid. Big lawn. Late summer. A smiling man in a slate suit, hand on the shoulder of a young woman in a pale dress. A woman beside him, arm looped through his sunlit hair, that careful, polished smile I used to wake up beside. My ex-wife. My fingers tightened on the frame so hard the glass made a tiny complaining sound. The man was Victor Hayes, a shade younger, tan like money. The young woman between them, lifted by both of their hands, was Samantha. Same eyes, same mouth poised at the edge of mischief. My chest closed like a vice. Everything okay? Samantha asked, hearing the silence change shape. I set the frame down gently, exactly where it had been, like I'd just discovered a live wire and had the sense to let go. Yeah, I said. My voice came out hoarse. Counter's an inch out of level over 8 feet. Not bad for her age. I bent to the baseboards again, not trusting my face. Sweat gathered at the back of my neck even though the room was cold. I counted studs by knuckle and nail head, the way carpenters count when they need to breathe. The numbers flickered uselessly. All I could see was that image burned inside my eyelids. My ex's hand resting lightly on Victor's sleeve, the way he leaned towards Samantha like a proud father. The caption wrote itself in my head, family. Samantha hopped off the counter with a soft slap of skin on wood. Do you want me to open the mudroom door? It sticks, but if you jiggle it. I've got it, I said too quickly. I pressed my palm flat to the jamb, steadied myself, and worked the latch. Old paint cracked under my thumb. The door gave with a shudder. She drifted to the window while I took another set of measurements I didn't need. Outside, the afternoon light lay thin across the gravel. In the reflection, I could see her profile, the point of her chin, the line of her collarbone where the sweater had slipped again. She was humming something under her breath, the melody stubbornly cheerful. How old were you in that photo? I asked, casual as I could make it. She blinked. Which photo? The one on the shelf. The lawn shot. Oh, her smile warmed at a memory. That was 3 years ago. Dad had just finished one of his big developments, and he insisted we do pictures while everyone was in the same zip code. He loves a victory lap. She glanced over her shoulder at me. Do you like it? I swallowed. Sure. He lives downtown now, she added. Even when he's here, he's not really here, you know? She shrugged. But he did pay for my roof, so I can't complain too loudly. Roof. My eyes ticked to the rafters as if the word could anchor me. Victor's money over Samantha's head. Victor's wife, my ex, in that frame, tidy as a ribbon. The room narrowed around my breathing. Your hands are shaking, she said quietly. I glanced down. The pencil trembled between my fingers like it belonged to someone else. I tucked it behind my ear, scraped a laugh from the bottom of my throat. Coffee's working. Do you want more? I can make a fresh pot. Or tea, if you're civilized. Coffee's fine. I didn't move. I couldn't move. I was standing in the house of Victor Hayes' daughter, hired by her to fix her family's old bones, and she had no idea that I'd watched her father walk off with my life like it was a spare set of keys. While the kettle muttered, she reached for the photo I'd set down and wiped a thumb over the glass, clearing a stripe of dust from my ex-wife's smile. We look so staged, she said. Dad says authenticity is for people who can't afford polish. Sounds like him, I said before I could stop myself. She frowned, not at me, at the words. You know my father? I went very still. There are moments when a man can choose the neat lie or the messy truth, and then there are moments when either one will stain. By reputation, I said carefully. Anyone in construction knows his name. That's not always a compliment, she said, but there was no apology in it. She slid the frame back behind the bowls, half hiding it again. Anyway, about the wall. I let the topic change like a lifeline. We sketched possibilities on the back of a catalog, a wide-encased opening to bring light into the pantry, a bumped-out window seat to catch morning sun, restored cabinets instead of ripped-out history. She leaned close to see the pencil lines, hair slipping from its knot, the faint scent of vanilla lifting when she laughed at her own bad drawing. When her shoulder grazed my arm, heat moved through me, precise as a nail set under a hammer. Sorry, she murmured, not moving away. It's fine, I said, and felt a truth I didn't want, that I liked how near she stood, that my pulse had its own opinion about sundresses in winter and women who said houses were she. She tilted her head. You look like you're carrying a story you haven't told me yet. I'm carrying a lot of things, I said, most of them heavy. Then set one down, she said simply. Just one. Her eyes held mine, not prying, inviting. I almost told her right there that her father had smiled while my marriage cracked, that the woman dusting the glass with her thumb used to sleep on my chest and whisper about new paint colors. Instead, I closed the notebook and gave her my practiced grin. First, I set down this wall, one thing at a time. She studied me for a long beat, then nodded. One thing at a time, she echoed. But if you ever want to talk about the other things, I make excellent coffee and terrible brownies. I'll keep that in mind. When I left the kitchen, I didn't glance at the frame again. I didn't need to. The image was lodged in me like a splinter you can feel with every movement. In the foyer, I buttoned my jacket slowly, buying seconds I didn't know what to do with. Samantha stood in the doorway, barefoot, unbothered by the cold like some stubborn promise. Email me the revised scope, she said. And tell your coffee you're welcome anytime. I will, I managed. On the porch, the air bit clean. Gravel crunched under my boots. I thought of Victor's hand on my shoulder the day he told me to move on, of the way my ex's eyes slid past mine like I was already a story she'd finished. I reached the truck and gripped the door hard enough to feel the metal give. In the rear view, the house watched me leave, windows narrowed against winter. Behind its glass, a small framed world waited on a shelf, smiling a lie I finally understood. She didn't know who I was. I knew exactly where I'd just stepped. I decided early on that I wasn't going to tell her who I really was, not yet. The moment I saw that family portrait, the game changed. Victor Hayes wasn't just a name I'd curse under my breath anymore. He was flesh and blood standing in the smiling frame beside my ex-wife. And now, his daughter, this barefoot, sundress-wearing young woman, was handing me coffee in her massive kitchen as if we'd known each other for years. Samantha was the kind of beautiful that sneaks up on you. Not the loud, look at me kind, but the sort that lingers in your head long after you've walked away. Sunlight coming through the open French doors lit her hair in gold streaks, and the faint scent of citrus shampoo followed her when she moved. She leaned against the counter, one leg bent, watching me pull my tape measure from my tool belt. "So, you work alone?" she asked, taking a slow sip from her mug. "Most of the time." I stretched the tape across the width of the island, forcing myself not to notice how her eyes flicked to my forearms when I braced the measure. "Less trouble that way. I can imagine." She tilted her head, the corner of her mouth curling. "Less people to slow you down." It wasn't what she said, but how she said it, like she wasn't just talking about work. I shrugged, jotting down the measurement on my pad. Something like that. She stayed there, talking about the estate, the renovations her father wanted, the mess she was trying to get under control. But there was no hurry in her voice, no real concern about deadlines. She just lingered. I could feel her eyes on my back as I moved from the island to the pantry. At one point, I turned to find her standing in the doorway, arms crossed under her chest. She had that glint in her eyes, the kind people get when they're figuring out if they want to take a step closer or pull back entirely. "You must get a lot of clients who keep you company while you work," she said. "Not really," I answered, my tone light but deliberate. "Most of them have better things to do." Her lips parted, the faintest smile tugging at them. "Maybe I don't." The air between us stretched taut, like a rope pulled just shy of snapping. I broke the moment first, moving past her with my notepad, close enough to smell that citrus again. She followed me into the dining room, talking about which walls she wanted removed. The sunlight caught the strap of her sundress slipping slightly off her shoulder, and I caught myself staring before snapping back to the job at hand. I wasn't here for that, not yet. Over the next few days, her presence became a pattern. She'd drift in with a fresh pot of coffee just as I was hitting my stride, or find a reason to ask about tools she clearly didn't understand. She'd lean against door frames like she had all the time in the world, eyes scanning me as if taking my measure in ways that had nothing to do with construction. I started to wonder if she was just bored or if she was playing her own kind of game. Either way, I kept my answers short, polite, professional. Let her wonder. One afternoon, as I was pulling up old flooring in the living room, she came in barefoot again, carrying 2 bottles of cold beer. "Thought you might need one," she said, offering it to me. Her fingers brushed mine when I took it, and the touch was warm, intentional. "Appreciate it." I twisted off the cap and took a drink, watching her out of the corner of my eye. She perched on the edge of the sofa, legs crossed, her dress riding just enough to make it hard not to notice. "So," she said casually, "how long do renovations like this usually take?" "Depends on the client," I replied. "And if the client doesn't mind a little distraction?" The beer went down slow. "Then it might take longer." She smiled, slow, knowing. And in that moment, I realized something. Samantha wasn't just flirting. She was testing boundaries. And so was I. I kept the conversation light, steering it back to the remodel, but her laughter lingered after I left that day. Somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't just a job anymore. The bait had been set. The only question now was who was reeling in who. The more time I spent at the estate, the more it felt like Samantha's orbit had quietly shifted to pull me in. It wasn't obvious. She didn't cling or make excuses to touch me. But there was a constant undercurrent in the way her eyes followed me. The way she lingered in doorways or leaned just close enough when she handed me coffee that I could smell the faint sweetness of her perfume. By the third week, I'd mapped out her patterns. She liked to wander in late mornings, barefoot, hair loose, carrying a mug in both hands as if she'd just woken up. She'd drift from room to room under the pretense of checking progress, but most of the time, she'd just watch. Sometimes she asked about the work, sometimes she asked about me. We were in the kitchen one day, me sanding down the window trim, her sitting cross-legged on the counter, when she asked, "So, what made you get into this? Renovations, I mean." "It's what I know," I said, keeping my focus on the wood. "My old man was a carpenter. Taught me early how to make things square and level." "And you just stuck with it?" "Sticking with things is a dying art," I replied. She tilted her head, studying me. "So you've always been loyal?" The question wasn't about work. I could feel the shift in her tone, the subtle weight behind it. My hand stilled on the sandpaper. "When it matters," I said. She smiled faintly, like I'd passed some kind of test. "Most people don't bother anymore." I looked at her then, really looked. Long legs folded on the counter, sundress hitched slightly higher than it needed to be, eyes catching the morning light like green glass. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." Her gaze held mine for a second before she shrugged. "Let's just say I don't get along with my father's new wife, or her version of what marriage is supposed to be." I played it casual, brushing dust from the sill. "That's so. She's fake. Everything's a performance. I barely visit when he's in town because she's always there, looking at me like I'm a stranger in my own house." Samantha's voice softened. "I don't think she likes me much. Probably because I see through her." My grip tightened on the sanding block. I didn't have to guess who the new wife was. The image of my ex standing beside Victor in that portrait burned fresh in my mind. She'd never been good with step anything. But Samantha didn't know. Not yet. "You don't strike me as someone who's easy to fool," I said. "I'm not." Her tone was matter of fact, but there was something else under it, something searching. "But most people don't expect me to pay attention. They think I'm just decoration." She swung her legs down from the counter, brushing close as she passed behind me to get to the sink. The scent of her hair hit me, and for a moment I forgot which part of the trim I'd been sanding. "You seem different," she added over her shoulder. "How so?" She turned, leaning back against the counter, arms folded. "You actually listen. Most guys just wait for their turn to talk." "I'm good with my hands," I said without thinking, "and my ears." Her mouth curved into a slow smile. Dangerous combination. The moment stretched, balanced on a thin line between conversation and something else entirely. I broke it first, returning to my work, but I felt her watching me the whole time. Over the next few days, she kept testing those lines. Once, she brought lunch, 2 sandwiches and a bottle of wine, laughing when I raised an eyebrow. "It's just 1 glass," she said, pouring it into mismatched tumblers. "You work better relaxed." Another time, she wandered into the study while I was repairing the fireplace surround, crouched beside me to see what you're doing, and let her knee brush mine. She didn't move it. Neither did I. Each encounter left me with the same knot in my chest, a mix of attraction and calculation. I was getting under her skin, sure, but she was getting under mine too. And I couldn't tell if that was part of the plan or a dangerous side effect. Then one afternoon, as I was packing up for the day, she leaned against the doorway and said, "You know, I like having you here. The house feels different when you're in it." I slung my tool belt over my shoulder. "Different how?" She hesitated, eyes flicking over me in a way that made my pulse kick. Like it's awake again. Like it's paying attention. Maybe she was talking about the house. Maybe she wasn't. Either way, I knew I was hooked, and that was exactly where I needed to be. Because when the time came to tell her the truth about her father, I wanted her leaning toward me, not away. And judging by the way she was looking at me now, I was almost there. It was a Thursday afternoon when I decided to stop dancing around the truth. The kind of day where the clouds hung low, heavy with rain, and the light through the windows turned everything the color of old film. Samantha had made tea this time, said coffee was for people trying to avoid feelings, and we were sitting at her kitchen table, blueprints spread between us like a truce neither of us had signed. She'd been talking about replacing the upstairs balcony railing when she said something about her father's perfectionism, and the opening was just there, dangling between us. "Perfectionism," I repeated, my tone sharper than I meant. You sound like you know what I'm talking about. I set down my pencil. I do. Her eyebrows rose a fraction. How? There it was. The question I'd been circling since the day I saw that damn family portrait. I leaned back in my chair, weighing the words in my mouth before I let them out. Because I knew him. Well, long before you and I met. She stilled, her fingers curling loosely around her mug. Knew him how? I didn't look away. He was a client. A friend. And then he was the man sleeping with my wife. Her breath caught. Just a small sound. But it was enough to tell me she wasn't expecting that. He stole her out from under me. I said, voice low, steady. Destroyed my marriage. Made me look like a fool in front of people I'd known my whole life. Left me with nothing but my truck and my tools. Your father didn't just take her, he enjoyed watching me lose. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Her eyes searched mine, like she was trying to decide if this was some elaborate joke, or maybe a test. Then the corner of her mouth lifted, not in sympathy, not in pity, but in something far sharper. So you're the one. I frowned. The one? She leaned back in her chair, her gaze almost appraising. I've heard things. Bits and pieces from him, from my stepmother. The word landed between us like a small, sharp knife. They never said your name, but they made it sound like some sad cautionary tale. I didn't realize you were real. Her reaction wasn't what I'd expected. No shock, no discomfort, just intrigue. Funny, she added, her voice softening. You don't seem broken. Maybe I just hide it well? Or maybe you're not the one who lost. Her eyes glinted. Not really. The air between us felt different now, charged, aware. I could almost hear the click of something sliding into place. She knew the truth, and instead of recoiling, she seemed drawn closer. You still talk to him? I asked. When I have to, she said. We're not close. He plays the part when it's convenient. But most of the time, he's busy being Victor Hayes. That part one believe. She studied me for a long beat, her expression unreadable. Then she pushed her mug aside and leaned forward, elbows on the table. So what now? You going to quit? Walk away before it gets complicated? Would you want me to? Her lips curved, slow and deliberate. No, it wasn't the answer I expected. Hell, I wasn't even sure what answer I'd been hoping for. But in that moment, I knew two things. She wasn't afraid of the mess, and she wasn't about to push me out of her life just because I'd drawn a line back to her father. I think he deserves to know, she said after a moment, almost casually. Deserves? That the man he screwed over is here, in his house, working with his daughter. Her eyes stayed locked on mine. Can you imagine his face? I could. I'd pictured it 100 times over the past year, though never with her sitting across from me, feeding the image like it was a shared secret. I leaned forward, my voice dropping. If we do this, there's no going back. Her smile didn't falter. I'm not much for going back. We sat there, the rain starting against the windows, both of us knowing the balance between us had just shifted. Whatever this was, job, flirtation, something darker, it had teeth now. And for the first time since the divorce, I felt like I was the one holding the blade. The storm rolled in just after lunch, a slow gray tide swallowing the light. By mid-afternoon, the rain was coming in sheets so thick I could barely see the drive from the upstairs landing. Thunder cracked over the hills, rattling the window panes, and then, just to make things interesting, the power went out. I was in the library, checking the moisture along the west wall, when I heard her voice behind me. Well, that's convenient, Samantha said, holding up a candle like she'd just stepped out of a Gothic novel. Guess you're stuck here until it passes. I glanced at the rain hammering the glass. She wasn't wrong. My truck's wipers could barely handle half this downpour. Not the worst place to be stuck, I said. She smiled faintly and set the candle on the desk, the flicker throwing gold into her eyes. I'll get some more. Don't want you tripping over my antiques. By the time she returned, the room smelled faintly of warm wax and the vanilla of her skin. She lit a few more candles, their small flames catching in the glass of the bookcases, and poured 2 glasses of wine from a bottle she claimed was already open, so it doesn't count. We sat across from each other at the low table, the storm muting the rest of the world. Every so often the thunder rolled, and I'd feel it in my chest. So, she said, tracing the rim of her glass. Tell me something you've never told anyone. I raised an eyebrow. That's a tall order. Come on, she coaxed. The power's out, the rain's doing its thing. This is prime confessional time. I thought for a moment, then said, when I was a kid, I used to believe houses had souls, that they felt everything the people inside them felt. Joy, grief, love, betrayal. Her gaze sharpened at the last word. And this house? It's still deciding about me. The corner of her mouth curved, but she didn't look away. I think it likes you. The rain softened for a moment, the kind of lull that makes you lean in without realizing it. She reached to pour more wine, her fingers brushing mine on the bottle. It wasn't an accident. I didn't move my hand. She set the bottle down slowly, like she didn't want to break whatever this was. The candles guttered in a draft, shadows shifting on her face. She leaned in just slightly, eyes fixed on mine. You know, she said softly, this would kill him. I didn't have to ask who. The answer was between us already, heavy and electric. Her lips were close enough now that I could feel the warmth of her breath. My pulse was a steady drum in my ears, my hand resting on the table beside hers. And then I closed the distance. The kiss started slow, a deliberate press of mouths that said neither of us was pretending. She tasted like wine and something sweet I couldn't name. When her fingers slid to the back of my neck, the air between us snapped taut, and the kiss deepened. No more testing, no more almosts. By the time we broke apart, the storm had picked up again, rain hammering the windows like it wanted in. She sat back slightly, her chest rising and falling, a small, knowing smile on her lips. Well, she murmured, I guess the house has decided. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just reached for my glass. The wine burned a little going down, but it was nothing compared to the fire in my veins. Outside, the storm kept the world at bay. Inside, the candles flickered, and the line we'd been towing for weeks was gone. Whatever came next, there was no pretending anymore. The first time was reckless. Reckless in the way that makes your hands shake after, your breath ragged, and your mind trying to catch up to what your body just did. It happened 2 days after the kiss. She texted me in the morning, "Are you coming by today?" Like I was some casual delivery she was expecting. I told her I'd swing by to check on the new cabinet measurements. She knew damn well the cabinets were fine. The front door was unlocked. She was upstairs, her voice calling down for me to just come up, a phrase that carried more electricity than it should have. I found her in the master bedroom, barefoot again, wearing a loose t-shirt that hit mid-thigh. Her hair was damp, the air faintly scented with lavender shampoo. She grinned like she'd been expecting me for something more than measurements. She sat on the bed, one knee tucked under her, tilting her head in that curious way she had. "You've been avoiding me," she said. "I've been working." "On what?" "Not here." There was an unspoken dare in her tone. I didn't bother answering. I just stepped closer, the soft creak of the hardwood between us the only sound. When I reached her, she didn't pull back. Her fingers brushed my wrist first, tentative, then slid to my forearm, curling slightly, an anchor and an invitation. The second kiss wasn't like the first. The first had been cautious, testing. This one was all in, heat and teeth, her breath catching when my hand found the side of her neck. She pressed into me, and before I could even think of pulling back, her t-shirt was sliding up over her head, tossed carelessly onto the floor. I told myself I wouldn't touch her. Not like this. Not with Victor's smug face somewhere in my mind. But the truth was, it wasn't about him anymore. It was about her skin under my palms, the little hitch in her breath when I grazed her ribs, the way she looked at me like she'd decided I was hers. We didn't make it under the covers. The bed barely held up under the rush of it. My work jeans rough against her thighs, her nails dragging over my shoulders, her voice breaking into a sharp whisper of my name. I wasn't gentle, and she didn't want me to be. After, she lay on her side, tracing idle shapes over my chest with a fingertip. "You know," she murmured. If he knew, it would absolutely wreck him. I didn't answer. I didn't want this moment stained by his shadow, even if part of me knew revenge was still laced into the edges of what we'd just done. That day turned into a pattern. She'd text me when she knew the house would be empty. Sometimes she'd keep her distance at first, leaning against the kitchen counter, watching me work. Other times, she'd make it impossible to keep my hands to myself, brushing past me in the hallway, her fingers ghosting over my lower back, asking innocent questions with a wicked curve to her smile. The photos started a week in. They weren't the kind you could mistake for art. Not coy, not subtle. She'd send them in the middle of the night, When she knew I'd wake up and see her stretched out in lace or nothing at all, the sheet barely covering her. I should have deleted them. I didn't. By the third week, the line between work and whatever this was had vanished completely. I'd find her watching me from the doorway, eyes lingering in ways that made my pulse quicken. Sometimes I'd make her wait until I finished a task, an unspoken power game we both seemed to enjoy. Other times, I'd set my tools aside without a word, pull her to me, and lose an hour in the heat of her. And yet, late at night, I'd lie awake wondering if I was losing myself in something dangerous. She was Victor's daughter. If this blew up, it wouldn't just be a scandal, it would be nuclear. But every time she touched me, every time she looked at me with that spark that said you're not just some job, I knew I wasn't going to stop. Not now. Maybe not ever. It came out of nowhere. One minute we were in the sunroom, her perched on the arm of a chair while I finished installing the new trim, and the next she was saying, "I want you to come to dinner next week." I glanced up from my work. "Dinner?" She nodded, casual like she was inviting me to grab takeout. "Formal. At my father's place. He's flying in for a few days. My stepmother will be there." Her mouth curved faintly at the word. "It's the family thing." I stared at her for a beat, letting the weight of that sink in. "You want me to meet your father?" "Not as my contractor." There it was. The air between us seemed to change, tighten. I set the trim piece aside and stood. "You're serious?" She tilted her head. "Dead serious. He doesn't know you're working here, and I think it's time he did. Just not in the way he expects." The image hit me before I could stop it. Victor Hayes, glass of wine in hand, catching sight of me across his polished dining table. The flicker of recognition in his eyes, the way his jaw would tighten. My ex-wife seated beside him, her smile freezing in place. "You want to start a war?" I said. She shrugged, that spark in her eyes daring me. "I want him to see me happy. On my terms. And I want him to know exactly who's responsible for it." It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was exactly the kind of thing I'd been daydreaming about since the day I moved into that cramped apartment. "What's the cover story?" I asked. "Old friend. Someone I've been spending time with." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping. "The rest, I'll let him figure out." I thought about it all night. I imagined walking into their perfect world, a wrecking ball in clean clothes. I imagined the way she'd look across the table at me, knowing we shared something no one else there could even guess at least not until she told them. By morning, I made up my mind. I texted her, picked the day. The week passed slow, every job I touched dragging under the weight of anticipation. She sent me a picture the night before, black dress, red lipstick, the caption, "Thinking about tomorrow." I arrived at her father's estate just before sunset. Samantha met me in the driveway, looking like sin wrapped in silk. She didn't kiss me. Too risky, but the heat in her eyes said plenty. Inside, the house was exactly what I remembered from my one visit years ago. Polished wood, curated art, the faint scent of expensive wine and money. Victor was at the far end of the hall when we walked in. He turned at the sound of our steps, his expression polite for exactly 3 seconds before it faltered. I watched the recognition hit, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Dad," Samantha said sweetly, "this is—" "I know who he is," Victor cut in, his voice flat. Her stepmother, my ex, appeared beside him, wearing a pale smile that didn't reach her eyes. If she was shocked, she hid it well, but I saw the way her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. "Shall we?" Samantha asked, breezing past them toward the dining room as if nothing was amiss. The table was set like a magazine spread, white linen, silver gleaming under the chandelier. I took my seat across from Victor, Samantha beside me. Conversation was stiff at first, Samantha steering it with practiced ease, but I could feel his gaze on me every time I lifted my glass. Halfway through the main course, she leaned close enough that her shoulder brushed mine. "Enjoying yourself?" she murmured, lips barely moving. I didn't answer, just met her eyes for a fraction too long. By dessert, the tension was a living thing. Samantha set her fork down, folded her hands neatly on the table, and looked straight at her father. "Dad," she said, her voice light but deliberate, "you'll never guess who I've been seeing." The room went still. Victor's jaw tightened, my ex-wife's eyes darted between us, and I felt the entire night teeter on the edge of something sharp. Whatever happened next, there was no taking it back. The clink of cutlery and the murmur of polite conversation filled the dining room. but I could feel the tension coiling tighter with each passing minute. The long mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier, crystal glasses catching the light. Victor sat at the head, all charm and authority, his wife, my ex, beside him, perfectly poised in a dress I'd once bought her. Samantha sat to my left, her thigh brushing mine beneath the table, a silent reminder of the storm she'd invited me into. Every course felt like a countdown. I didn't touch much of the food. My appetite was gone, replaced by the slow burn of anticipation. Samantha had told me her plan before the dinner, how she wanted him to know, how she wanted everyone to know. I'd agreed without hesitation, though now, with the moment looming, I could feel my pulse in my throat. Victor was in his element, boasting about a new development project, the table laughing at his jokes. My ex kept glancing at me, a mix of confusion and discomfort on her face, like she couldn't decide whether I was just a contractor she vaguely recognized or a ghost from a life she'd buried. Dessert arrived, some decadent chocolate creation that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Samantha didn't touch hers. She set down her fork, leaned forward, and looked directly at her father. "Dad," she said, her tone light but deliberate, "you'll never guess who I've been seeing." The room stilled. Even the waiter hovering near the doorway froze mid-step. Victor chuckled, swirling the wine in his glass. "Oh, some young entrepreneur I should know about?" "No," she said, her lips curving into something between a smile and a challenge. "Him." She tilted her head toward me. Victor's gaze followed. I watched the recognition hit. First a flicker of uncertainty, then shock, then something darker. His face drained of color, and for the first time since I'd met him, he seemed at a loss for words. My ex inhaled sharply, her hand tightening around her wine glass until I thought it might shatter. "You're joking," Victor said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Samantha shook her head. Not even a little. She let the silence stretch, her eyes locked on him. "You remember him, don't you? The man whose wife you stole. The man you left with nothing." The air turned heavy. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. Victor set down his glass, his jaw tightening. "Samantha, this is real," she cut in. "We've been involved. And I thought you should know, since you like to keep track of everyone's business." Her hand slid under the table, fingers curling around my knee, a subtle claim. My ex finally spoke, her voice sharp. "This is disgusting. You're doing this just to hurt him." Samantha laughed softly, but it wasn't amusement, it was satisfaction. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm doing what I want, for once." Victor pushed back his chair, the legs scraping against the polished floor. "Get out," he said, not looking at me but at her. "Both of you." "No," Samantha said simply. "You don't get to order me around anymore. And you don't get to control who I see." Voices rose. My ex was shouting now, accusing Samantha of being manipulative, accusing me of being pathetic. Victor's temper was flaring, his face reddening as he hurled accusations of betrayal. Samantha stayed calm, her words deliberate, almost savoring each one as she reminded him of what he'd done to me, and how this was the one thing he couldn't buy, bully, or take away. When I finally stood, it was because I wanted to, not because he'd told me to. "I think we're done here," I said quietly, meeting Victor's glare head-on. We left to the sound of their voices still echoing through the dining room, a swirl of rage and disbelief. Out in the cool night air, Samantha slipped her arm through mine, a wicked smile tugging at her lips. "That," she said, "was worth every second." And I had to admit, she was right. The fallout came fast. By the next morning, Samantha's phone was buzzing nonstop. Calls from her father, texts from her stepmother, a few from mutual acquaintances trying to talk sense into her. She ignored them all, lounging in bed with a coffee while the sunlight streamed through the curtains. "He's cut me off," she said casually, scrolling through something on her phone. "No trust fund, no credit cards, no driver for the car." She looked up, smirking. "Apparently I'm disgraceful." "You sound thrilled," I said, leaning against the dresser. "I am." She set the phone down and stretched like a cat. "He thinks I can't survive without him. I can't wait to prove him wrong." I wasn't sure where this defiance ended and where I began in her mind. Was I her rebellion, her revenge, or something else entirely? Maybe I didn't care. A week passed before she called with news that made me sit up. "I sold it," she said. "Sold what?" "The cabin," she replied, as if I should have known. It's been in my mother's family forever. He couldn't touch it. It was mine outright. I just signed the papers this morning. She told me the buyer had offered more than she expected. Enough to live comfortably for a while. Enough to start something new. Enough to hire me for the renovations she was already dreaming about. I want you to run it, she said. Top to bottom. No bidding war, no middleman. Just you. I hesitated for a beat. You're sure about this? I'm sure I want you in my life, she said, her voice softer now. Whether he likes it or not. The work started within days. The cabin sat on a wooded ridge 2 hours outside the city, the air clean and sharp. It was nothing like Victor's estate. This place had history, warmth, a soul you could feel in the creak of the floors and the scent of pine through the open windows. She was there most days, sometimes helping, sometimes just watching. There were moments when we'd be knee-deep in sawdust and she'd lean over, hair falling into her face, laughing about something, and I'd forget entirely about Victor. Forget the revenge, the past, everything except her. Nights were different, quieter. We'd share a bottle of wine on the porch, the forest stretching dark around us. She'd rest her head on my shoulder, and for a while it felt like there was no one else in the world. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the trees, she asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd met before all this? Before him?" All the time, I admitted. But then, maybe it wouldn't have been the same. She smiled at that, a slow, knowing smile. You're probably right. We finished the cabin in late autumn. She stood in the middle of the living room, turning in a slow circle, taking it all in. It's perfect, she said, and when she kissed me, it wasn't about proving a point to anyone. It was just us. I knew then that Victor had already lost. He could rage. He could cut her off. He could try to erase me from the picture, but he couldn't undo what had happened. He couldn't take back the hours, the nights, the things we'd built together. Maybe it had started as revenge. Maybe some part of me would always savor the look on his face that night at dinner. But now it was more than that. This was something he couldn't buy, something he couldn't control, something he could never get back. And for me, that was the real prize.